Hi, peeps. You're listening to She's My Cherry Pie, the baking podcast from the Cherry Bomb Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jessie Sheehan. I'm a baker, recipe developer, and author of 4 baking books, including Snackable Bakes. Each Saturday, I hang out with the sweetest bakers around and take a deep dive into their signature bakes. My guest today is Joyce Tang. Joyce is the founder and owner of Bake Some, a beloved bakery in the Bay Area known for its inventive Asian American pastries that blend French technique with flavors, ingredients, and memories rooted in Asian American culture. Joyce started her career in tech before falling in love with baking and making a major career pivot, which she explains began with baby steps. After studying pastry, she sold her baked goods wholesale before eventually founding Bake Some as a pop-up in 2020. By 2021, she opened its first brick-and-mortar, and today, Bake Some has 2 locations in Oakland and Alameda. Joyce is about to release her debut baking book, Bake Some, Asian American Pastries, Breads, and Other Treats. Alongside her story, the book is packed with recipes for everything ranging from mooncakes and 5-spice chocolate cake to okonomiyaki danishes, gochujang garlic pull-aparts, red bean conchas, and kwasubi, which is the love child of a croissant, and spam masubi, the Hawaiian snack of spam, rice, and seaweed. Joyce joins me to talk about many of her favorite sweet and savory items from childhood, the regular visits to Chinatown for dim sum with her family, and what those meals helped her understand about her own identity, her journey into the pastry world, and her fantastic new book, and the impact her team members have had on the recipes. Then Joyce walks me through her recipe from the book for Brown Butter Mochi Bites. She shares her tricks for making brown butter and about the importance of baking the bites for a long time and preferably in a steel mini muffin tin to ensure they have crispy outsides, and how important it is to release them from the pan as soon as they exit the oven. I loved chatting with Joyce, so stay tuned for our convo. You can find today's recipe at cherrybomb.substack.com. The new issue of Cherry Bomb magazine is here. The theme is Game Changers, and we have 5 different covers featuring 7 superstars who have changed the game in a major way. The issue celebrates the visionaries, innovators, and changemakers who are reshaping the worlds of food, drink, and hospitality. To get your copy today or check out our list of retailers, visit cherrybomb.com or the link in our show notes. Let's chat with today's guest. Joyce, so excited to have you on She's My Cherry Pie and to chat Brown Butter Mochi Bites with you and so much more.
Thank you so much, Jessie, for having me. I'm really excited to be a part of this podcast.
Yay! So to begin, can you share an early childhood baking memory? There might not have been a lot of baking happening, so if there isn't one, no worries.
Well, when I was growing up, I lived in an immigrant household. And when you live in an immigrant household, which means that most of the time, my parents didn't really have time to cook between taking my brother and I to school and working their 1 to 2 jobs. Many of the times when they wanted to express their love and affection, it would come in the form of a pink pastry box or with loaves of bread or 粽子, like Chinese tamales and things like that. And they would come home with bundles and bundles of food on end for us. And so while we didn't cook as much as a family during my younger years, there are some small taste memories where my mom was making things like mango pudding, which is in the book and I think is really fun and also very easy to make. We did make things like soybean milk. And that required a lot of blending and cooking and stirring. But those are the things that we did do. We didn't take on any big lamination projects or anything crazy. But my mom did try to instill a lot of culture within me at a very early age.
Can you tell us about black sesame soup and fresh tofu with ginger syrup? Those were 2 things that popped out at me when I was sort of looking through the head notes of the book and trying to kind of mine the book for sweets that you might have eaten as a kid.
Yeah. Well, in Chinese culture, it's not super common to have cold dessert. It's more common to eat hot desserts because hot foods are more nourishing than cold ones, which are considered more of a shock to the body. Cakes came much further down the line, obviously. But back in the day, sweet dessert soups like red bean soup or black sesame soups and sweet glutinous rice balls are super common. And we would eat them all the time after dinner as your dessert course. And black sesame soup is basically pitch black. When you look at it, it is dark of night. And there are some superstitions about that black sesame, like making your hair darker and getting rid of your white hair, if that is something that you care to do. But I have not heard any scientific evidence that is truly the case. But hot dessert soups are a thing. And the silken tofu, I think, also is one of those things that you can find basically in every single dim sum restaurant. And it kind of comes in a very large wooden tub. And you scoop it out with a tiny little flat metal spoon so that you can perfectly scrape out little shards of that tofu pudding and not break up all those curds. And you order it, it comes out hot, and you dump some ginger syrup on it, and then you slurp it up real fast.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so delicious to me. I also read about your love of apple tarts from a package when you were little. Like you loved apple tarts and you loved egg tarts. Can you tell us about that?
Well, egg tarts and apple tarts are those desserts that were also brought over by your elders to basically show you how much they cared, loved, and respected you. And so people don't show up at your house without things. There's a saying that if you don't show up with anything, you showed up with 2 bunches of bananas, and your 2 bunches of bananas are your hands. And so my mom was like, you can't just show up with 2 bunches of bananas. You must show up with something. So we always made sure that when you went somewhere, you'd bring something, and vice versa. When people came over, they would bring something. And very commonly, lots of apple turnovers and lots of egg tarts. And my parents still bring those, especially to my kids now. Less so for me, but more for my kids. They have now taken on the mantle.
And are the apple tarts a baked apple tart? Yeah.
Apple turnovers, covered in demerara sugar, supermarket apple turnovers, they're everywhere.
Love. You and your brother hung out in the kitchen with your mom a lot. Can you tell us about some of the things you made?
Yeah. Well, as immigrant children, we hung out around the house a lot. And we were latchkey kids too. So we spent a lot of time at home microwaving food for ourselves. And then when my mom did come home with these bundles and bundles of food, she had us start pretty small. We would pick green beans. We would chop vegetables, wash vegetables, cook rice, and things she didn't think we could mess up for a very long time. And the thing that my mom still likes to do with my kids now is that we make these savory rice dumplings. They're glutinous rice balls, essentially. And then we put them into a savory chicken soup. Or you can also make a sweet version of it and put it into like a sweet dessert soup too. Or fill them with black sesame and other yummy fillings. But those are really easy things. If your kid can play with Play-Doh, they can make glutinous rice balls.
I love that. When you were making sweet silken tofu, can you tell us about working your way up to the soybean bag?
Well, my mom we would make soybean milk from scratch. And I think this is probably back in the day when buying soybean milk wasn't so readily available in the supermarkets and it wasn't so mainstream. But she would let me hit the buttons on the blender to blend up all those beans. And then when I proved that I wouldn't spill everything out of the bag, there's like a cheesecloth bag that you would then pour that liquid, the bean and water and the juice into the bag, and then you squish it. And you do need some sort of dexterity and a little bit of coordination just to make sure that you can get all that good and that precious soybean milk back into the pot so that you can cook it. And then there's also the job of stirring the pot once it actually gets all squished out. And then you have to make sure that you don't stick to the bottom of the pot. Otherwise, all is for naught.
Love. Can you tell us about stealing cubes of Spam in the morning when your parents were making you breakfast? And I love that you wrote your parents, which makes me think that your dad was part of the cooking as well.
Yeah, my dad definitely part of the cooking, and he is the one responsible for cooking the clay pot rice. So he is the man that does it because he has all that exacting tactile memory that it takes to cook rice over a stovetop in a clay pot. And the rest of us really can't do it successfully, but he's the one that we turn to for that one. But we had constant staples in the house, and those things would include macaroni, spam, and chicken broth. And this type of breakfast is very, very traditional, I believe, in Hong Kong. And it's just one of those things that you could whip up together really quickly with whatever vegetables you had on hand. And you could go ahead and make it in like 15, 20 minutes. So we would have this breakfast pretty regularly, or even lunch or dinner. And now I like it when I'm sick. But we would chop up all the spam cubes and then leave them on the cutting board until everything else was ready, and then throw it all in for this nice little warming, healing, nourishing breakfast. And my brother and I would run around the kitchen and just gobble up all the spam cubes on the cutting board before they could get into the soup. And we were like little squirrels just stealing from the kitchen early on. But we figured out pretty fast that they were pre-cooked and that it was kitchen safe to eat. So we just started snacking straight off the cutting board, pretty much straight out of the can.
Love. Peeps, guess what? I'm going to be in conversation with cookbook author Leah Koenig on Wednesday, September 2nd in Brooklyn at the Books Are Magic location on Montague Street. We'll be celebrating the release of her 8th cookbook, The Dessert Table, 100 Joyful Jewish Desserts. Come to hear about Leah's journey writing and recipe testing this book, and you'll be able to meet me and Leah and have her sign your book. It's all happening at 7 p.m. on September 2nd at Books Are Magic on Montague Street in Brooklyn. For tickets and more info, click the link in our show notes. I hope to see you there.
So you were big into dim sum as a kid with your family. You would go on your monthly visits. And
if not more.
Oh, I love. When I was a kid, we went probably once a month, every Sunday. I grew up in Boston, to Chinatown in Boston. So good.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, and you came to sort of understand something about those visits and sort of why that was important to your family and important to you. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah. Growing up as a Chinese American, your sense of identity and place is always going to be extremely difficult to pinpoint and explain and to own, even for the most part. And we would constantly seek out Chinatowns, and we would seek out dim sum. We would seek out fresh produce and things that reminded my parents of home and what it meant to eat in southern China as well. And so we would always venture out to find the best dim sum, the best seafood, and the most authentic. I struggle to use that word because I don't know that it does everything justice, but I think that we would always go and we would eat dim sum, and we could practice our Chinese there. We could hang out as a family there, and we could also witness other people in community and enjoying similar foods that weren't as common to find. And we could learn about dragon beard candy. We could learn about bird's nest, which is a little bit weird. And then we could eat that silken tofu and find a lot of things that just have these deep, rich cultural roots that then open up a gateway into the country that we never really got a chance to live in.
That's so funny that you mentioned the dragon beard candy, because I was going to ask you to tell us about it.
Yeah. The dragon beard candy, I think, it's an ancient marvel of candy making. And I remember for the first time walking into Koi Palace in Daly City, they were one of the big early dim sum houses of the Bay Area. And they would bring in these dragon beard candy makers into the restaurant, and you could watch them stretch and pull. And this candy would turn into such fine strands of hair that then they would wrap into peanut and sugar mixture with coconut, and then you just eat them and it would just disintegrate. It's a melt in your mouth candy, but it took an incredible amount of skill, and I think a lot of heat pain tolerance too from the fingers, because that candy had to have been pretty much molten, 300 plus degrees to get to that consistency. And then you have to work it so fast to get it perfectly into the little candies, and they're perfectly shaped, perfectly sized. And it's just a modern marvel that we can still do things like that. And they were able to do things like that hundreds and hundreds of years ago, too.
Was there any food TV that you were watching when you were little, or any cookbooks during your childhood? I'm assuming you hadn't yet caught the baking bug before you moved out of your mom and dad's house, but was any of that happening when you were growing up?
The biggest thing I would say was that the Food Network ended up being very prolific in my teenage years and early college years. And I would watch a lot of Alton Brown, actually, on TV. And I remember making cream puffs in earnest when I was younger, and it was really difficult. And it was my piece de resistance. My very first thing I made, I think, was pumpkin profiteroles. And I made them for the holidays. And you sweat making that panade, and you're like, this can't be right. It can't be right. It looks so wrong. And then you have the warm choux paste, and you're like, this can't be it either. But let's follow the instructions. And then lo and behold, magic happens. Air and steam and heat make you cream puffs. And it was pretty magical to see that, that chemical transformation and all of that stuff happening in the oven, and things that you didn't think were possible are now possible. And yeah, it took a lot of exploration on my side and a lot of random reading and experimentation to kind of take baby steps forward. But it was promising, but it wasn't pretty to start with.
When did the baking bug bite you? Was that not till college?
It was late high school, early college time period.
So you might have made those profiteroles while you were still living at home before you.
Yeah. No, I definitely made them in my parents' kitchen.
Oh,
Definitely made them in my parents' kitchen.
I love that.
Yes.
You went to college at Berkeley and you worked at Facebook for a decade, but you had this voracious baking habit. And you write about the many baby steps it took you to sort of make sure the decision to shift careers was a good one. Can you tell us a little bit about those baby steps?
The baby steps really were talking to more people about my inklings and my thoughts that I thought were a little unreasonable at the time. And I would just ask chefs or cooks at both Google and Facebook. I would spend time in the kitchens with their chefs, and I would ask them if I could come hang out for an hour or two at a time and make cookies or make cupcakes or laminate croissants, make bread, things like that. And most of the time they told me yes. And that was pretty surprising. And I didn't make a total mess of myself, but I was slow. And I knew I wasn't working at full speed or full capacity, and I didn't know what I didn't know yet. And a lot of them encouraged me to potentially stage in other restaurants and other places. And then I started competing in random competitions locally too. Bacon competition, the bacon takedown, the lamb takedown, ice cream competitions. I would just do it just because it was fun. And it was a way of pushing myself to do more than I would normally do.
At one point, I think around 2015, you took this intensive viennoiserie course, and then you ended up sharing those bakes from the class or started making them at home and sharing them at school, and you would share them with your colleagues at work, and you sort of had an epiphany about impact. Can you tell us about the epiphany?
Yeah, well, at SFBI, they offer this week-long intensive, and I decided to take viennoiserie 1, and it ended up in producing tons and tons of croissants and a lot of brioche and other items. And we couldn't eat them all, so I drove a lot of it from South San Francisco over to Menlo Park, and I would walk into the office with these giant boxes, and I would just walk up and down the halls, and I'd be like, hey guys, I made some fresh croissants. You guys want some? And the answer was a resounding yes, please. And people were excited, basically lost their minds. I was like, you've all had a croissant before. It's not the first time. But it was the first time any of them had something so fresh. And it was handmade, and I had baked it less than a couple hours ago. And you could really see the difference between that product versus some of the products that you would normally get in supermarkets and other big box stores. And people were very, very excited, very happy. And I ended up realizing that people were so much more excited about these boxes of pastries than anything else I could have done for them in the last several years. And so for me, the impact felt really real. And it was a stark contrast for me for what I was doing on the day to day. And I had to make a call about what I wanted to do over the long haul.
So you ended up leaving your job, you went to culinary school, and eventually you started selling baked goods wholesale and at pop-ups. And by the pandemic, you had started these pastry boxes. Tell us about the Bake Some box.
The Bake Some box, yes. So we were baking a lot of pastries for coffee shops and boba shops all over the Bay Area pre-pandemic. And that was the business model that I thought I was going to go with, just because I had a really young family and I was pregnant at the time, and it seemed to help foster a more sustainable lifestyle. But once the pandemic hit, no one bought pastries anymore. And it went from, 10 stores to 0. And my freezers were full and it was crisis mode essentially. And we had to let go of everybody, but I still wanted to not waste all the pastries that I had made for all these stores. And so I went on to Facebook and I posted $20 for a grab box of pastries. I will make you whatever I have and you will have what I make. And that was it. And I said, do you hear the reservations? Just reserve a box. I'll make them all. And then I would bake a couple times a week. And then slowly but surely the momentum built, and the Chronicle covered it. SF Eater covered it, and everyone covered it as a pandemic resilient story. And it was what we all needed at the time. We all needed warm hugs from pastries while we were all facing the unknown. And it all just kind of snowballed until we got into the store.
Can you tell us about the Spam Musubi croissant, which I know you sold at pop-ups and was sort of a love letter to your childhood?
Yeah. So it's the Spam and macaroni noodle soup I grew up eating as a kid. I was hand laminating a lot of pastries across the street from the Westbury Beer Garden in Berkeley. And so I would wake up super early in the morning, hand laminate these things. And then I think I put them in the proof box and cross my fingers overnight. And then I would show back up a couple hours later, pull them out and bake them. And then I would carry them across the street to this beer garden where I would sell cookies and macaroons and krusubis to the Berkeley public. And this is almost 10 years ago now that we're talking about it. I just found some old pictures of me at the beer garden, and it was a tough sell. People saw the word Spam and they told me, ooh, yuck, that's weird. The kids actually knew what macarons were, so I was actually really impressed. The Berkeley kids are, foodies from birth. And then I had to explain myself on the krasubi more times than I liked. I told everybody, it's just pork shoulder. It's pork shoulder in a can with salt and some probably meat glue, I would assume, too, to get it into its iconic shape. But it is a modern engineering marvel that fed the world during wartime. And the Spam Musubi, I think, is also similar in that it's a rice and seaweed snack that is really popular in Hawaii. And I thought I would create something that would be a nod and an ode to that, and something that spoke to me. And I did want more people to see my yum as a yum and not yuck it. And then if you fast forward like 8 or 9 years, we get the krasubi covered in the New York Times as one of the best dishes in 2024. And then you all of a sudden had people coming into the store and asking for the krasubi and not asking me what it was. And it was a big turning point for me.
Amazing. I love that. The bakery, which I need to come to visit you immediately.
For sure.
Which has been described as sort of selling nostalgic pastries from the heart. Bake Some pastries represent childhood memories. I love this. Childhood memories of the employees who come from across the Bay Area, not just yours. I thought that was such a beautiful way of putting it, to sort of understand why the menu is so multi-culti, as it were, with so many things coming from so many different places. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Was that sort of always your vision for what you would sell at the bakery?
I think that a lot of times with big name chefs, you get an assumption that, the chef is a genius, avant-garde, or coming up with all these ideas out of nowhere. And I didn't think that was true. And I wanted to acknowledge where things came from, its history, its past, and also give the team an outlet and a voice for their own creativity too, because there is such a rich culture in the Bay Area, and to ignore all of that. And my first iteration of the bakery was called La Chinoiserie because I thought it was going to be more Chinese based. But when we got into Bake Some, it felt more true to myself when we actually talked about some being the sum of many, many different parts. We have a lot of Filipino folks on the team, and a lot of the the Filipino bakers that we have on the team, they've brought a lot of different flavors like the halo-halo onto the menu. And then, we had another employee bring in the local moco, and it really just means so much more when folks are passionate about the pastries, and you can taste it and you can feel it. And I never wanted to feel like it's like a top-down hierarchy dictatorship of a bakery. And we do enjoy fostering a sense of openness and contributing to the menu as it changes and evolves through the seasons.
So let's talk about your fantastic new book, Bake Some, Asian American Pastries, Breads, and Other Treats from the Beloved Bakery. It is so gorgeous and special. You describe it as an ode to Asian Americana. Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah. So growing up in Bay Area, I think, is a unique experience unto itself, just because you are growing up in the many different Asian American diasporas, and you're eating a lot of pho and the chebamaos, and you're eating all sorts of different multicultural, like Korean foods, Filipino foods, and you're exposed to so much, as well as like Indian cuisine too. And you're always constantly seeing and eating and learning. And I think it is a little bit of a unique experience because we have such diversity here and a willingness to explore, maybe. I think that exists now more and more in the entire world, but I think it is through the lens of the Bay Area. So we do reference a lot of different businesses around here that have impacted in kind of bringing forth that Asian American experience, like the Benkyodo, the mochi shop, the 100-year-old mochi shop that was making mochi through World War II. And there's all sorts of iconic businesses and individuals that have made their mark through the Bay Area and have also made their impact across the community too, that I think are super special.
So I love this. The book is organized by how Bake Some trains its team members. I loved that notion. Can you describe that to us? Tell us what that means.
It means that the recipes are organized from easy, medium to more difficult. And so you would never teach someone how to laminate a croissant before you taught them how to mise or measure out a recipe. And so by mastering the puddings and jellies and being able to measure ingredients and measure them accurately, because there are some like coagulants in, say, the tofu pudding, and if the coagulant isn't quite right, you might end up with a harder or softer pudding than you might want. And so getting comfortable with the measurements and gathering all your ingredients and sourcing them, and then you can kind of move on to cookies and cakes. And then it's like a bit more of a multi-step process, and then we can layer in the lamination and make it a little bit more complicated. It is taking you step by step and showing you those building blocks, like how to pull a window pane on your bread to make sure that you have enough gluten formation before moving on to the next step.
The book also not only shares recipes in this sort of graduating from easy to hard, but it also teaches us how to work with the particular ingredients and flavors that are in the recipes. Was that always the plan, to sort of do both? Were you encouraged to explain more as the writing process kind of got going?
Yeah, and I think we realized that some of these ingredients weren't super easy to source. And because they weren't super easy to source, not everybody knows how to process, say, a purple yam or an ube. We had to go into depth about how to do it and how to find it and, what to do once you got your hands on it and how to store it and whatnot. And so those are all questions that kind of came up. throughout the process of writing the book. And depending on where you live, there are different challenges to handling that situation. So try to include some options for folks in there.
So the book is described as not chasing authenticity. Can you unpack what that means?
I think the word authenticity is likely overused at this point. And I think that chasing authenticity might be a bit of a fool's errand just because the baking, the cooking, the food that we eat every day is a bit of a moving target. And what I really wanted to convey in the book is that all of the things that we eat today, none of it is really original. It all came from somewhere else. And we do need to look a little bit back into the past to understand where these things came from in order to inform how we move in the future and what kind of things and stories we share and what we eat. I think I wanted to just take a bigger bird's eye view on that, and that there is no single source of truth when it comes to authenticity, just because it doesn't really truly exist in my eyes.
All right, now we're going to talk about the recipe for Brown Butter Mochi Bites. First of all, tell us what butter mochi is.
Yeah, butter mochi is a really popular dessert found primarily in Hawaii, and it's known for its characteristic chewiness. And butter mochi is typically baked. But in Japan, mochi is typically steamed and then pounded from rice into what it is. And so there is a difference, I guess, once the mochi hits the United States. It's a little bit of a different creature just because baking is now a little bit more popular than steaming is. And so you get a whole new texture and you get a whole new eating experience with that mochi.
Tell us about how your mother-in-law prepares it, like in big pans for her family.
Oh, yeah. She has a signature recipe and she creates it in a giant casserole dish. They come out in little squares, little golden squares. They have the crispy edges, chewy centers, and they're delicious and really rich and decadent for dessert. She makes them a lot less now, but they're still really nice when she does make them.
These bites are in snackable size. What appeals to you about this little snackable size?
Yeah, so the snackable sizes, we did try a couple different sizes, but found that in this form factor, it's like about a 2-inch diameter on the mochi bites themselves. And what we liked about it is that you could get the right amount of crunchy exterior to the chewy interior. And that kind of texture matters to us a lot, especially on cookies too. We try for a crunchy exterior, chewy center. And having those two textures in one pastry really makes that pastry exceptional in our opinion. And so having that really thick steel pan helps us to create that caramelization on the exterior.
So when you guys do it in the bakery, you're not doing it in muffin tins or mini muffin tins?
Oh, they are in mini
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
But they're unlined, and that helps us to crisp up the edges. And it is almost a 40-plus minute bake for us, even in some of our industrial ovens, just so that we can make sure we get that really good crunch on the exterior. And then you do have to demold them pretty quickly, just so that they don't steam up in the cups too. So you have to take them out and you have to let them cool completely before packing. And so there is a process to all of that.
At the bakery, you make them in many different flavors. Can you tell us about some of the flavors?
Yeah, the flavors currently on the menu right now are going to be Thai tea, blue jasmine, brown butter, and black sesame. And we constantly switch them around. We have ube, lilikoi, lychee, and then they come with bright pops of color in the centers too, which folks really enjoy. The kids really like this pastry.
So first things first, we're going to brown the butter. Tell us what the brown butter is going to add to the mochi that we wouldn't have otherwise if we use just regular butter.
Oh, well, yes. So first off, there's a visual element to it. You'll get these darker brown spots on it. The main point of the brown butter is to add a little depth of flavor and more rich complexity and nuttiness to the batter at the end. And it's pretty. It smells really good. And it'll make your kitchen smell really nice once you're done with it.
It sounds incredible. So in a medium saucepan, we're going to warm some unsalted butter over medium heat. And then once the butter starts to boil or bubble, we're going to begin to scrape the bottom of the pot frequently with a spatula. What's your favorite kind of spatula? Are we talking flexible? Is there a brand? And also, why do you want us to stir?
We just use silicone spatulas, but high temp spatulas. Don't just use any old regular plastic spatula just because it's really easy to melt them in a pastry scenario. So just be careful with those. And they are labeled as such. And I always recommend having both a spatula and a whisk on hand when you're making brown butter because the brown bits are heavier than the oil and so they sink. And you have to keep scraping the entirety of the bottom of the pan. Otherwise, you do get stickage, and that's where you're going to burn. And then burnt brown butter is no good. We're making like 10 and 12 pounds at a time when we do it. I know the home cook won't do it, but you have to be extremely meticulous about it. Otherwise, it does burn. You go from golden to burnt in a very, very short time window. So it does require a lot of attention.
You also, I think, say that stirring also will keep the brown bit sort of on the smaller side, which maybe is pretty for the aesthetic of the bites.
Yeah.
So we'll keep cooking the butter until the milk solids are nearly dark chocolate color, which I loved. I've never heard them described as dark chocolate, and it's so good. Can you remind us what the milk solids are? And you also have this great expression, color equals flavor. So if you could tell us what milk solids are and why we want them that dark chocolate color.
I think there is a perception in the public that the brown butter just needs to be like a chestnut color, like a light brown color. And once it attains a little bit of color, most people tend to want to pull it because there's always warnings about burning your butter and you don't want to do it. But the darker you take it, the more those Maillard reactions occur, and you can actually extract and make your brown butter more flavorful by taking it a little bit darker. And the same goes for like baking cookies. You can take them darker to a certain point and you get that Maillard reaction too, but then you get them too crispy. And so there is a spectrum on which that golden flavor is acceptable. You don't want to go all the way to burnt, but you can actually take it a lot further than you think you can take it.
I think that's so true also, and I'm sure you agree with pie. People are pulling their pies way too early. We're not actually looking for golden. It's like it's going to be deeper.
It's going to be dark brown.
Yeah.
But nobody wants a soggy bottom either.
Right. Exactly. It's a dance. So we're going to pour the brown butter into a heat-proof bowl, and we're going to let it cool completely to room temperature. And you say it should be soft and opaque. It should be soft and opaque once it's room temp, correct? So it's like a solid.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's basically sloshy, wet liquid when it's hot.
Yep. Then we're going to heat the oven to 350. We're going to grease either a mini or a standard-sized muffin tin. First of all, which do you prefer at the bakery, standard or mini? And is there a brand, or is it sort of a restaurant supply situation that it would...
The mini muffin tins we like are actually made out of steel, if I'm remembering correctly. But they are on the pricier end. So what you get in a home baker setting, you're going to get a lot of aluminum. Just know that because the aluminum is thinner, you can't achieve quite as dark a crunchy exterior as you can with a thicker, more steel metal pan. So I do recommend going for as thick of a gauge as possible. Some people approximate it with a darker finish because that will make your items brown faster, but I do like that thicker gauge.
Oh, and I'm sorry, do you prefer mini or standard sized when you're at the bakery?
Mini. We do mini.
I love. So cute.
Yep.
They are bite sized. We're going to grease our tin with cooking spray. Why spray instead of softened butter?
That's purely operational.
Okay. Yeah, no, but because of my bakery days, I too am a cooking spray person, but I wondered if it was okay if a user, if a home cook.
Absolutely. If they want to use butter, I think that will actually yield an even more crispy exterior than you can achieve with spray. But I also know that everybody's tight on time these days. So again, cooking spray is the recommended if you're on a timeline.
So in a stand mixer fitted with the paddle attachment or a large bowl with a hand mixer, we're going to cream together some of that brown butter with some packed brown sugar. Do you have a preference on light or dark brown sugar?
I actually don't. I think they're pretty interchangeable, and I don't think that most people can tell the difference.
So we'll cream that together at medium speed for 1 to 2 minutes until the sugar is fully incorporated into the butter. And then we'll pause the machine occasionally to scrape down the sides of the bowl. Then with the mixer running at medium-low, we're going to add some room temp eggs one at a time. Next step, in a small bowl, we're going to mix together the mochiko. Can you tell us what mochiko is for those that don't know?
Yeah, it's glutinous rice flour that's been ground down into a really, really fine white powder dust.
And can you tell us where we can buy it?
You can buy it at most Asian grocery stores, and it'll have a little blue star on it, and it'll say mochiko. It's in a tiny white box.
And then we're going to add some baking powder and some kosher salt. Do you guys always use kosher salt in the bakery as opposed to fine sea salt?
Yeah.
Yep.
Typically kosher salt. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Gradually, we're going to add that dry mix to the mixer, and we're going to be pulsing it on and off to prevent the mixer from throwing a cloud of flour into our face. What speed are we at? Like, if we put our mixer at low, might we be able to get that dry ingredient in without it popping in our face?
Yeah, probably. But just know that mochiko is extra fine. And so it is going to want to fly back up if you don't control it. So our mixers are generally covered in a little dusting of mochiko most of the time.
Yeah. Should we picture almost like the consistency and texture of 10X, of powdered sugar?
It's similar to that. It doesn't have that texture where it kind of like crunches on itself. It's just very, very fine.
Yep. So as the flour mixture is being incorporated, we're going to slowly add both whole and coconut milk and mix until the batter is streak-free. Can we just put both of those milks like in a measuring cup and then pour them in?
Yep, that's what we do.
And are those two milks traditional?
Yeah, so the coconut and the regular milk give it a lot of flavor and a lot of fat. I don't want to say that they're traditional. Some of the butter mochis use canned milks, so a lot of condensed milk and things like that too. So not necessarily always fresh whole milk.
And would this be the moment where if we were going to flavor this in a different way, let's say we had used regular butter, we could add flavorings at this point?
Exactly. Yeah. You can add any additions or colors or other types of flavors that you might want to incorporate.
So we're going to fill each muffin cup 3/4 of the way with the batter, and we're going to do that even if it's minis. Just go 3/4. Okay. And then we're going to top with a sprinkling of toasted buckwheat groats. Tell us about that. That made me pause. Like, really? Tell me about that.
Yeah. It's usually used in tea to make like a caffeine-free tea. So it has like a little bit of a nutty flavor. And I like to buy slightly larger puffed buckwheat groats. And then when you bake them up, there's like a nice textural experience in the top of your mochi bites.
Then we're going to bake these until about 45 minutes. Bake until a toothpick is inserted in the center of a mochi, of one of the bites, and comes out clean, and that the mochi feels quite firm when you touch it. Then we're going to quickly flip the tray upside down wearing oven mitts and give it a nice smack. Explain to us why we want to do it quickly.
Oh, yes. You want to do it quickly because the cakes are touching the tins. And the moment it stops baking, it starts steaming and cooling. And if you let that moisture collect within the muffin tins for too long, you'll get a soggy bottom. Unless that's what you're going for, you want to get them out of the tin a little bit more quickly. And it will cause sticking if you wait too long, too.
Yeah. And you say it should come out smoothly. Then we'll place the mochi bites on a wire rack to cool at least slightly, because you say they're best right out of the oven, yes?
Just cool enough to not burn your mouth. Yes.
Okay. That's a good temperature.
Yeah, that's a caveat. Don't eat them straight out of the oven.
Right. And then I love that you say that we can reheat in an air fryer for 5 minutes to re-crisp if necessary.
That's what the customers have told us on many occasions.
Oh, I love that.
I thought I would pass that little nugget along.
So good. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Joyce. And I just want to say that you are my cherry pie.
Thank you, Jessie. Appreciate you taking the time.
That's it for today's show. Don't forget to follow She's My Cherry Pie on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And tell your pals about us. You can find today's recipe at cherrybomb.substack.com. She's My Cherry Pie is a production of the Cherry Bomb Podcast Network. Our producers are Carrie Diamond, Catherine Baker, and Jenna Sadu. Thank you so much for listening to She's My Cherry Pie, and happy baking!